This is Electric Universe Eyes, and today I'm going to read you a portion of Chapter 3 from the book Healing is Voltage, written by Tennant, MD. You will recall that I began my journey toward getting well by recognizing that cells are designed to run between a pH of 7.35 and 7.45. I also began my journey with the idea that if I could figure out how to make one cell work, I could make them all work. The following chart shows you the requirements for a cell to work properly. We doctors are trained to pay particular attention to things that are abnormally high. For example, we watch carefully for a high blood sugar, for diabetes. However, we rarely think about hypoglycemia unless a patient is dizzy or faint. We watch carefully for high temperature, indicating fever, but we are not trained that a low temperature indicates hypothyroidism. We watch carefully for high blood pressure and are insensitive to the fact that low pressures due to overexuberant prescription of medication is causing our patients to be dizzy. We rarely look at pH levels or oxygen levels unless the patient is in intensive care. I want to focus on the importance of pH. When I was trying to figure out how to get well, I couldn't remember a lot about pH. I remembered that it was something about acid-base balance, but I knew very little more than that. So I began to read about pH. What I discovered is that pH, shorthand for potential hydrogen, is really a measurement of voltage. When electrons are running through a conductor like a copper wire, they are there or not. If the switch is on, you have an electron donor. If the switch is off, there are no electrons. However, a solution provides a different situation. The solution may be an electron donor or an electron stealer. One measures the voltage of the solution with a sophisticated voltmeter. By convention, if the solution is an electron donor, one puts a minus sign in front of the voltage. If, however, the solution is an electron stealer, one puts a plus in front of the voltage. For example, if your pH voltmeter measures plus 150 millivolts, it means that the solution is an electron stealer with 150 millivolts of stealing power. If your pH voltmeter measures minus 200 millivolts, it means that the solution is an electron donor with 200 millivolts of donating power. After measuring the voltage of the solution, one can convert that to a logarithmic scale called pH. A voltage of plus 400 millivolts is the same as a pH of 0. A voltage of minus 400 millivolts is the same as a pH of 14. A solution that is neither an electron donor nor electron stealer is called a pH of 7. With this understanding, one can see that a pH of 7.35 is the same as a voltage of minus 20 millivolts. A pH of 7.45 is the same as a voltage of minus 25 millivolts. Thus, we see that all cellular biology texts tell us that cells are designed to run between minus 20 and minus 25 millivolts of electron donor status. The following chart begins to help us understand the difference between electron donors and electron stealers as it relates to the human body. Electron stealers cause damage, are a pH from 0 to 6.9, are acidic, are free radicals, are the positive pole, are destructive, and at the atomic level spin left. You will hear statements like, all disease occurs when you are acidic. What this is really saying is that all disease occurs when your voltage is low or in an electronic stealer state. You will hear statements like alkalize or die. What this means is that you must have electrons available to do work or your cells will die. A free radical is a molecule that is missing electrons. It is like a mugger looking for someone's purse to steal. When a free radical steals electrons from the cell, it damages the cell. An antioxidant is a molecule capable of giving away electrons. Thus, when your mother says, "Eat your vegetables," she is saying that the vegetables contain electrons that are good for you. We maintain our health and heal primarily by making new cells. To make a new cell requires a voltage of minus 50 millivolts. Salivary and urinary pH are about 0.8 pH, units less than cell pH. Salivary pH is a rough indicator of cellular voltage. Urinary pH is a rough indicator of the voltage in the fluids around cells. When normal, both should be 6.5. If you add 0.8 to 6.5, you get a pH of 7.3. This equates to minus 20 millivolts. Now, let's consider my thumb. My thumb is running at a voltage of minus 25 millivolts. It is pink, feels fine, and works well. Now I hit it with a hammer. The thumb is red, swollen, hot, and has a pulsing pain. It has automatically gone to minus 50 millivolts. This is necessary to make new cells needed to replace the ones I damaged with a hammer. At minus 50 millivolts, blood vessels dilate and dump raw materials such as proteins, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, minerals, etc. into the neighborhood. I need these raw materials to build new cells. I also need minus 50 millivolts to have the energy to turn these raw materials into new cells. As soon as I finish making enough cells to replace those I damaged with the hammer, my thumb goes back to minus 25 millivolts. It is normal and I am happy. Now let's assume that I ran out of voltage before I was able to make enough new cells to replace those I injured with the hammer. My voltage dropped to minus 10 millivolts. Now I am stuck in chronic disease. I cannot heal unless I make new cells. I cannot make new cells unless I have minus 50 millivolts and all the raw materials I need to make new cells. In chronic disease, my thumb hurts all the time. It is white and doesn't work very well. Thus we see that chronic disease is always defined by having low voltage. One cannot cure chronic disease without inserting enough electrons to achieve minus 50 millivolts. One must also have the raw materials necessary to make new cells and to eliminate the toxins or infections present that will damage the new cells. One can take all the medications you like and do as much surgery as you like, but you will not heal unless you have minus 50 millivolts, raw materials, and lack of toxins. Without the ability to achieve minus 50 millivolts and the necessary raw materials to make new cells, you cannot maintain your health and you suffer aging and chronic disease. You also are unable to repair injuries, so they can also lead to chronic disease. You don't need drugs to heal. You need to make new cells that work to heal. To make good cells, you need voltage and a good diet. You also need to remove toxins from your body that damage cells and make you obese. Once one begins to understand that chronic disease and healing are controlled by voltage, one must ask the following questions. 1. How do cells normally get voltage? 2. How do cells store voltage? 3. Why did my voltage drop enough to allow me to get sick? 4. How do I measure the voltage of organs? 5. What do I do when I find the voltage is low? There are several bad things that happen when voltage drops. The obvious one is that organs simply don't have enough horsepower to do their job. Another is that they don't have the energy to rid of toxic waste and it begins to accumulate. Remember that at minus 50 millivolts, there is a pulsing pain. When you have low voltage, it simply hurts all the time. Thus, pain is simply a symptom of abnormal voltage. You correct it by correcting the voltage. If you put a tube into a glass of water and began bubbling oxygen into the water, the amount of oxygen that will dissolve in the water is dictated by the voltage of the water. As voltage is raised, more oxygen will dissolve in water. However, as voltage drops, oxygen comes out of solution and leaves the water. Our cells are 70% water. Thus, as voltage begins to drop in our cells, oxygen leaves the cells. This has serious consequences. Our cells contain a process for turning fatty acids into glucose. They are processed through a series of chemical reactions called the Krebs cycle. The end result is a rechargeable battery called ATP. As ATP provides electrons to keep the cell functioning, it becomes a discharged, rechargeable battery called ADP. When oxygen is available, for every unit of fatty acids run through the Krebs cycle, we create 38 molecules of ATP. However, if oxygen is unavailable, only 2 molecules of ATP are created for every unit of fatty acids. Thus, as voltage drops and oxygen levels drop, our metabolism goes from, quote, 38 miles per gallon to 2 per gallon. Thus, it is very difficult for cells to have enough energy to function with such inefficient metabolism. Another problem of decreased oxygen is infections. Our bodies contain perhaps 1 trillion microorganisms. However, most of these are inactive as long as oxygen is present. However, when oxygen levels drop, these bugs wake up. The first thing they want to do is have lunch, and they want to have you for lunch. Since these bugs don't have teeth, they must put out digestive enzymes to dissolve you so that they can acquire the nutrients from the cells. One of the problems has to do with these digestive enzymes. Let's assume that you have a Streptococcus bacteria having lunch on your tonsil. You, of course, recognize this is a sore, painful throat. We all know, however, that the digestive enzymes produced by these Streptococcus bacteria can enter our bloodstream and cause damage to our heart valves. They can also damage your joints. The same process can happen anywhere in the body. Let's assume you have low voltage in your gallbladder. This means that your gallbladder will hurt, have decreased oxygen, and inefficient metabolism, and have bugs having lunch on the gallbladder. The toxins produced by these bugs can enter the bloodstream and cause brain damage. You may have infections in your large intestine, in your sinuses, or other places causing damage, an autoimmune problem. However, it is simply bugs having lunch because your voltage and thus your oxygen levels are low. I have seen a number of patients with the diagnosis of lupus. A blood test called the ANA test is used to make the diagnosis of lupus. If you correct the voltages in such patients, their symptoms go away and their ANA tests go back to normal. As voltage continues to drop, it will go from an electron donor to an electron stealer status. This is known as a change in polarity. When voltage drops to plus 30 millivolts, you have cancer. It is generally taught in Western medicine that the blood is sterile. This is because placing blood into a petri dish does not normally show growth. Generally speaking, only bacteria that have cell membranes reproduce in petri dishes. However, if you look at blood under a high-powered microscope without the blood stains or other chemicals, you will easily identify many microorganisms. These microorganisms do not have cell membranes. As voltage and oxygen levels drop, and as toxins build up in the system, you will see these organisms change from spherical to rod-shaped to yeast-like and finally fungus with hyphae. The association of finding fungal-like forms in the blood with the development of tumors was reported as long ago as 1840 and has continued to be reported ever since. Although the existence of these forms has generally been denied by most microbiologists and oncologists, the development of the German microscope known as the ergonom makes these denials no longer credible. This microscope is capable of 15,000 to 40,000 power and allows one to see even viruses in their live state. Please look at the videos at www.grayfieldoptical.com. How do cells normally get voltage? There are many ways that the body is intended to get electrons. However, our modern culture has tended to eliminate most of these sources. The Earth is a large electromagnet. If you take the electrodes of a voltmeter and stick them into the dirt, you will measure voltage. An area of high voltage always causes electrons to flow to an area of low voltage. If your body has lower voltage than the Earth, walking barefoot on the dirt or grass will cause electrons to flow from the Earth into your body, recharging you. However, if you walk with shoes, this cannot occur. Water from the ground contains electrons. We call this alkaline water. However, when placing chlorine and fluoride into the water, it turns into an electron stealer. Thus, every time we drink such water, It steals electrons from us. The water we should be drinking should contain electrons and be clean and free from toxins. Again, you can test your water to see if it is an electron donor or electron stealer by simply placing the electrodes of the voltmeter into the water. If the voltmeter shows minus voltage, the water is an electron donor. If the voltmeter shows plus voltage, the water is an electron stealer. If you stick a voltmeter into a raw potato, you will measure voltage. However, if you bake a potato or freeze the potato and then insert the voltmeter, most of the voltage will be gone. Unprocessed food contains voltage. Once we process food, most of the voltage disappears. We are designed to eat unprocessed food so that it brings its own electrons with it. When you eat food that has been processed, your body must provide electrons from other sources to digest it. You can actually tell the quality of food, such as vegetables, by simply using a voltmeter to compare the voltage in one product versus another. Remember that voltage always moves from an area of higher voltage to an area of lower voltage. When my wife and I hug each other, there is obviously an emotional element. However, there is also an issue of pure physics. The one of us with the lower voltage will get a donation of electrons from the other one. As we continue to hug, soon we will be the same voltage. This process continues when any two living things touch. For example, if I hold a dog or cat and I am lower voltage than the dog or cat, the animal will donate electrons to me. Then it will run outside, recharge itself, and bring me some more voltage. If I lean against a tree, the tree will donate voltage to me. Moving water is always an electron donor. Still water is an electron stealer. Thus, taking a shower will energize me, whereas taking a bath will make me tired. Swimming in the ocean will give you electrons, but swimming in a chlorinated pool will steal voltage from you. Moving air is an electron stealer. Thus, people often feel tired if they sleep under a fan. Riding in a convertible is great fun, but you are always tired when you get to your destination. If you take a voltmeter that measures in millivolts and hold it in the air inside your home, you will measure a small amount of voltage. Now take it outside. You will find there is much more voltage out in the sun. If you take a quartz crystal and squeeze it with a pair of pliers, it will emit electrons. This is called the piezoelectric effect. Our muscles are piezoelectric crystals. Thus, when we exercise, our muscles create electrons. The muscles are also rechargeable batteries. Thus, the movement of our muscles recharges our muscle batteries. Exercise is a major way the body acquires electrons. There is a pump within the skull and down the spine called the craniosacral pump. Each time this pump activates, it sends a surge of electrons through the body. Thus, you can see that the human is designed to get voltage primarily the way our grandparents got it. They worked out in the sun, drank water from a well, ate unprocessed foods, weren't afraid to touch the earth with their hands or feet, hugged their family, leaned against a tree, or stood in moving water while they were fishing, and weren't afraid to stand in the rain. Common ways electrons are taken from the body. 1. Acidic water, like tap water, chlorinated water, fluoride, and most bottled water. 2. Carbonated beverages. 3. Caffeinated beverages like pop, coffee, or tea. 4. Alcoholic beverages. 5. Cooked food. 6. Processed food. 7. Healers or doctors who touch their patients lose electrons to patient. 8. Hugs transfer electrons from one person to another. 9. A parent holding a sick child. The child gets well quicker and the parent is left tired. 10. Moving air, like wind, air conditioning, fans, convertibles, and hair dryers. How do cells store electrons? Cell membranes are made up of opposing layers of fats called phospholipids. This unusual fat is made up of a ball with 2 legs. The ball is an electron conductor. The legs are insulators. Anytime two conductors are separated by an insulator, you have an electronic device called a capacitor. Capacitors are designed to store electrons. Thus, cell membranes serve as, quote, battery packs for the cells. Liquid crystals. Dr. Bruce Lipton has recently discovered that the cell membrane also serves as a liquid crystal. The molecules in solid things stay in one location. An example of a solid is a crystal. However, in liquids, the molecules move about. In some substances called liquid crystals, the molecules can move about but act like solids. This means that liquid crystals are neither a solid nor a liquid. Thus, the name seems strange in that we are calling a solid a liquid when we say, quote, liquid crystal. We are basically saying, quote, liquid solid. Liquid crystals are influenced by electric current and or temperature. Certain liquid crystals have elements that are twisted. When one applies electricity to these liquid crystals, they begin to unwind. One can use this characteristic to use them to either block the passage of light through them or allow the light to pass. This depends on whether the elements are twisted or untwisted. The thing that determines whether the elements are twisted or untwisted can be anything from a magnetic field to a surface that has grooves in it. An LCD is made with two plates of polarized glass, one in front and one in back. The back one is polarized 90 degrees from the front one. In between these two plates are filters coated with liquid crystals. The orientation of the crystals is aligned with or opposed to the passage of light depending upon the voltage applied. It is like having a rope with its fibers twisted tightly, so light cannot pass down its length, or a rope with its fibers untwisted, so that there are spaces between the fibers that allow light to pass down its length. The function is very much like a rotating diaphragm that opens or closes depending upon whether voltage is present or not. One can see that the phospholipids that make up a cell membrane have legs that can twist or untwist to permit light or water or other molecules to be blocked or pass through the cell membrane. They open and close depending upon the voltage applied. Semiconductors. Carbon, silicon, and germanium are elements that are called semiconductors. Each has 4 electrons in their outer shell. This allows each atom to attach 4 other atoms in a nice crystalline structure called a lattice. The carbon lattice is called a diamond. Carbon, silicon, and germanium in their crystal state are electronic insulators. Because they do not have free electrons, all are bonded to each other. They insulate rather than conduct electricity. However, one can turn these insulators into what are called semiconductors by adding impurities to the crystals. This process is called doping. As you can see in the graphic of a portion of the periodic table, carbon, silicon, and germanium are in a column. In the column next to them are nitrogen, phosphorus, and arsenic. To the left, the column contains boron, aluminum, and gallium. Arsenic and phosphorus each has 5 outer shell electrons. When you place one of them into a lattice of carbon, silicon, or germanium, each of them has 4 electrons. There is an extra electron per set of 4 atoms. This extra electron can move from place to place, turning the insulated crystal into a semiconductor that allows some electric current to flow through it. Since the semiconductor has a negative charge, it is called an N-type. If you add boron or gallium to a crystal of carbon, silicon, or germanium, you have a different kind of semiconductor. Since boron and gallium each have only 3 electrons in the outer shell, binding them to carbon, silicon, or gallium, each has 4 electrons, creates a hole in the latticework. This hole is searching for electrons and accepts electrons that wander by. This creates a positive charged semiconductor called a p-type semiconductor. Diodes. When you place a negative and a positive semiconductor against each other, you have what is called a diode. What is unique about a diode is that it allows electric current to flow in one direction but not the other. It is a one-way street for electric current, whereas conductors like copper allow the electric current to flow either direction. When you put a voltage source like a battery, as you see in the left part of the graphic, the plus part of the battery attracts, and holds the electrons from the negative N-type semiconductor, and the minus pole of the battery attracts and holds the holes in the positive P-type semiconductor. The result is that no current flows through the semiconductors. Devices that allow current to flow in one direction but not in the other direction are called diodes. If you change the battery to the configuration you see on the right side of the graphic, electrons flow from the battery into the N-type semiconductor and then into the holes of the P-type semiconductor, with the net effect that current is flowing through the diode. Transistors. If you use 3 elements instead of 2, you have a transistor. You can use 2 N-type with a P-type in the middle, or 2 P-type with an N-type in the middle. The most commonly used type is 2 N-type and 1 P-type, as it is easiest to use this format in a silicon sheet to make a chip. A transistor normally blocks the flow of electricity through it, acting as a switch. However, when you apply voltage to the center layer, a large amount of voltage can move through the transistor, making it act as an amplifier. A small current can turn a larger current on and off. As you can see, the phospholipids of the cell membrane act like a transistor and a microprocessor. A piece of silicon that can hold thousands of transistors is called a silicon chip. With transistors acting as switches, you can create Boolean gates, and with Boolean gates, you can create microprocessor chips. For an excellent discussion of LCDs and transistors, see www.howstuffworks.com/lcd1.htm. Tesla resonating circuits. The peripheral cytoskeleton and Tesla's resonating circuits. In 1895, Nikola Tesla invented the tuned circuit or resonating circuit. It is a capacitor and a coil wired in parallel. Wired in parallel means that the components are on a square as you see in the diagram. Capacitors, abbreviated as C, store electrons. Coils provide inductance, abbreviated as L. This is known as an LC circuit. Parallel tuned circuits are used in radio and other electronics to couple resonant energy from one circuit to another in transmitters and receivers. This is the system used by the cell membrane and peripheral cytoskeleton to couple energy from the cell and into the cell. As you will recall, the cell membrane is made of 2 opposing layers of fat molecules that create a capacitor. Just under the cell membrane is a maze of protein called the peripheral cytoskeleton. These 2 are wired together in parallel in what is known as an RC circuit, which is a resistor-capacitor circuit. RC circuits work much like your checking account and savings account. In the photo, assume cash is coming into the top of the circuit. The resistor is your checkbook, and the capacitor is your savings account. As the cash comes in, it flows through your checking account to pay your bills. Any cash left over is transferred into your savings account. On months in which there isn't enough cash coming in to pay your bills, you take some out of savings and transfer it into your checking account to keep things going. So it is with an RC circuit. Electrons come into the circuit and flow through the resistor, peripheral cytoskeleton of the cell, to keep energy flowing into the cell so it can do its work. When there are more electrons being delivered by the perineural system, the acupuncture system, water, ionic transfer, etc., that are needed to supply the requirements of the cell, the excess is stored in the capacitor, or the cell membrane. When the cell is inflamed, delivery of more electrons is reduced because the cell becomes somewhat isolated from the delivery systems by the edema. Thus, the cell must operate on the electrons stored in the cell membrane. This is the same as, quote, running on battery power. Thus, you see that the control of voltage into the cell is controlled by a Tesla RC circuit. A series-tuned circuit is used to electrically stretch or shorten an antenna or waveguide transmission line so that the length of the antenna or waveguide will match the length of the incoming wave. For example, radio stations each put out a different frequency or wavelength. If you have a wire that is exactly the same length, the energy from the radio signal will be absorbed, and you will hear that station on your radio. Thus, to hear all the radio stations in your area, you would need a separate wire for each station to match the wire lengths and wavelengths. However, if you attach your wire to the series coil above and make the capacitor variable in power, it changes the effective length of the wire. That is the tuning knob on your radio. In the body, extracellular fluid, impedance, and organs, capacitance, are wired in series as a series-tuned circuit. We now see that the cell membrane is the brain of the cell. It is a capacitor that stores voltage for the cell to use. It is a microprocessor that controls the functions of the cell by interacting with the environment around the cell. It is a liquid crystal that can open and close to allow things to enter the cell or keep them out, and also allow things to exit the cell or keep them in. It is part of a Tesla resonating circuit that allows it to communicate with other cells. Remember that every cell is designed to run at about a negative 20 to 25 millivolts. When cells need to repair themselves, the voltage is increased to 50 millivolts. This is controlled by the cell membrane peripheral cytoskeleton resonating circuit. Since the electrons necessary to allow this to happen are stored in the fat of the cell membrane, the fat is critical to the cell being able to do its work at minus 20 millivolts and to repair itself at minus 50 millivolts. Without an adequate amount of food fat, the cell membranes can't function, and thus the cell can't function. You must also remember that cells replace themselves frequently. If you don't give the cell new building materials, including adequate amounts of good fat, the cells will have to make new cells with materials from the worn-out cell it is replacing. Building new things using worn-out parts creates a new thing that doesn't work much better than the old one it is replacing. As you can see, cell membranes must be made with good phospholipids, or fats, for them to work. Making them with plastic fats prevents this from working correctly. Since all of the brain and nervous system, the liver, and every cell membrane are made of fat, you must eat lots of good fat to keep making good cells. A normal person is about 20 to 25% fat. This means you need to eat about 20 to 25% of your normal body weight in fat every 8 months, because your body completely replaces itself every 8 months. This chapter continues on with trans fats, or plastic fats, and goes way deep, but I've made the point that I wanted to share with you today. Your body is electric. Everything that's measured with pH is measuring the parts of hydrogen. It's measuring the voltage, whether that's water or soil or your body. I've said this before and I'll say it again. You are an electric being, and you've got to keep yourself charged the correct way. Rewind to the beginning and look at what is an electron donor versus an electron stealer. And I want you to think about what's going on right now in the world today with this virus. And you consider, what are you putting into your body? Are you raising the voltage of your body, or are you lowering it? And I'll make this suggestion again. If you want to raise your immune system, you need to put good things in there. A couple of things to alkaline your body would be something as simple as a teaspoon of baking soda in an 8-ounce glass of water, or a tablespoon of nanosilver. There are many other things that you can ingest, and good food to eat, and exercise, and do yourself a favor. Go outside when the sun is shining and soak up the rays. Go breathe the fresh moving air. Go stand in the rain. And you know what? Take your shoes off and go connect with the earth and recharge yourself. And if you're locked up with someone in your family, you have every right to go give them a hug. And if they don't want a hug, maybe they just really need a hug. And if they still refuse, tell them you need a hug. I used to joke around saying I need 3 hugs a day to stay mentally healthy. And you know what? I believe it. Raise your body voltage, stay healthy, stay smart, and stay strong.